You're listening to The Creative Imposter, episode 111. Welcome to The Creative Imposter. I'm Andrea Klunder, and I cannot even believe I have been keeping this episode from you. I recorded this incredible conversation with Tina Dietz in the fall of 2019. By this point, that feels like a lifetime ago. I seriously don't even know whether we are the same humans we were back then. And I cannot tell you why I never released it, except that listening back to it this week now actually feels like exactly the right time for you to hear it. Tina and I connected because Jessica Kupferman from She Podcasts, in all her wisdom and intuition, threw us together on a panel for the first ever She Podcasts Live last fall on the topic of voice, along with Clara Harris and Lisa Orkin, who were featured on episodes 84 and 90 of The Creative Imposter. And Tina's specialty is helping professionals amplify their message through audiobooks, podcasts, and vocal leadership. Vocal leadership. I think that is what we are seeing emerge during these 2020 times of upheaval. Well, that and perhaps the opposite of vocal leadership, but we'll save that topic for the swamps of Facebook, yeah? In this episode, Tina gets real and vulnerable with us, and even gives me some insight into some of the creative shedding of skin that I was doing last year. It's a lovely, deep conversation. And before I play it for you, I want to take a moment to invite you to come explore your voice with me Friday, August 14th, 2020 at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. I'm offering Let Your Voice Shine, a vocal coaching session designed for podcasters, but really for anyone who wants to feel more confident, be more expressive, and communicate more clearly with their voice. This session is part of the PodFest Global Summit, and tickets start as low as free and go up from there to include masterclasses, session recordings, and VIP access. The main fest begins August 10th. You can learn more and RSVP at thecreativeimposter.com/podfest. The link is in the show notes, in the episode description, in your app, and at thecreativeimposter.com/111 for episode 111. There you will also find links to connect with Tina and her company, Twin Flame Studios, as well as the podcast that she slyly references but doesn't name during the interview. Okay. At long last, the moment you've been waiting for, my Creative Imposter conversation with Tina Dietz. I want to start with a little thought experiment. We have gotten to know each other a little bit over the last few weeks because we have been assembled as part of a panel for She Podcasts Live on voice. But by the time people listen to this, I think it will be after the conference.
Good point.
So can you imagine into the future a point in which we have already attended the first ever She Podcasts Live? We have already done a panel workshop on voice, and now, how was your experience? What were your biggest takeaways?
So what I remember is that the audience kind of felt like a bowl of popcorn being popped. They start out a little bit simmer, and then they warm up, and then all of a sudden they start to have insights. And, oh, that sounds just like me. Oh, God, yes, I totally relate to that. Okay, I'm going to try that right now. And by the end of that panel and by the end of that discussion, not only do they feel better about the sound of their own voice, but they're excited to share with other people what they learned. And they feel more confident about going back to their own shows and back into their own relationships where they're communicating, feeling armed and fortified with new knowledge and new technique.
Awesome. And what are you coming away from the conference overall with?
Oh, wow. I'm always looking to see who I connect with. I often call myself a purple squirrel. A purple
Okay.
squirrel. Yeah. A purple squirrel is somebody who has got a unique, diverse skill set, background, personality, stuff that doesn't necessarily always seem to fit together, but somehow it ends up in this nifty person. And I think there's going to be a whole tree full of nutty purple squirrels at this particular conference. I've known Elsie and Jessica for a bunch of years now, and we've shared a bunch of stages together in the podcasting world. And I think the way that this conference has been coming together, even just the communication and the conversations that happened before the conference, are an indicator of exactly how extraordinary this event is going to be. So I'll be coming away with new people to collaborate with and create opportunities to get people's voices out into the world. All of that is what I always come away with conferences, but this one in particular, I think is going to be super juicy.
What do you think is so compelling about using a medium like podcasting to use your voice to express something deeply meaningful to you or to build a brand, whatever it is that you're using podcasting for? But then also, people are feeling less than confident at times or feeling like they're not quite so sure about their voice. So it's compelling, and at the same time, it's vulnerable.
Yes, it is vulnerable. It is vulnerable because, well, when I speak in rooms about falling in love with your own voice or vocal leadership or how to get on more podcasts and be a well-respected expert guest, it's really funny. You ask people, do you like the sound of your own voice? And 80% or more of people in the room will raise their hand saying they don't like the sound of their own voice. Even in a room full of speakers and podcasters, it's usually more than half the room will raise their hand. So many times it's people are overcoming things that they don't like the sound of their own voice, because they feel compelled to share a message and because they have the urge to create community, create connection. And as we've seen in a bunch of podcast research, and when we recorded the documentary, The Messengers, I was a lead interviewer on that movie. And in interviewing all of those podcasters from different parts of the world, different backgrounds, different topics, most of them didn't know each other. The word that came up over and over again was intimacy.
Mm.
Podcasting being a very intimate medium. They had story after story about how intimacy was created among communities through podcasting. It's really quite extraordinary.
I think intimacy is another one of those things that is both compelling and also vulnerable, right? How do you work with people to, as you say, overcome the vulnerability so that they can get to the good stuff, so that they can get to that point of making this intimate connection with their listeners and with the people that they're speaking to? And this could be specifically for podcasting, or this could be for anybody who's using their voice in some way to make a connection.
People will come and they say, I want to change this or that about my voice. And I focus less on changing people's voices as into helping them drop into their message, drop into what I call their big V voice, their inner voice, rather than being so concerned about the outer voice from the outset. Because when you focus on your big V voice, your message, you get connected to that. You get connected to that small, still place that you can hear yourself. And I don't mean the tapes and the things that tell us we're fat and ugly and nobody loves us. Not those inner voices, but the real voice, the voice of connection, the voice of wisdom, the voice that we've had since we were really little, most of us, where we could sense the beauty in the world, where we had the urge to change something or to create something or be involved with something that inspired us. When you can connect to that place and see what motivates you, then that's a place to create from. And it tends to change how people speak about their world and about their message. You know, as experts, everyone I work with are experts in one way or another. We're taught as experts to educate and inform. And really what brings people together are stories. So working with people on their message and what they want to convey, and then what are the vehicle you're going to convey that with. And then we get into what's fundamental to any storytelling is, of course, your breathing. And starting with the breath is the most important thing that anybody can do. Yes, we work on articulation. Yes, we work on musicality in the voice, all these wonderful things, and playing with that. Sonority, tempo is a huge indicator of credibility in vocal leadership. All of these things we play with and work with, but it all comes from a place of what is your intention? What is your big V voice? What is your message? That everything we can connect back to.
So tell me a little bit more about how you define this phrase that you use in your messaging, which I love, which is vocal leadership. What does that exactly mean?
Vocal leadership is really taking your big V voice and your small v voice, which is the actual physical voice, and aligning them and learning to use both of those as a tool, as a vehicle. Actually, a vehicle is actually even a better word for it, as a vehicle to create whatever it is you want in the world. You know, everything changes in the world first with a message. First with somebody stepping forward and saying, I believe this, I think this should happen, and I'm going to be one of these people that helps make it happen. Who's with me? So whether that's a written message or it's a verbal message, it still comes from that place of that big V voice I was talking about. And that is the place where we start with vocal leadership. It has that declaration of I am. What do you stand for? Who are you in the world? What do you believe? What hills are you willing to die on? And we really have to take a look at that as individuals, as leaders. And then how do you spread that message is another part of that. So vocal leadership is the entire arc of connecting with your message and walking the path of your inner voice.
Okay, that feels really vulnerable too, because, okay, so I'm just going to speak for myself. When I started my first podcast, The Creative Imposter, I started podcasting because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I had been running a business, which at that time was a yoga studio, and I had run myself into bankruptcy. There were a lot of things that were going well with the business, but then I just financially couldn't make it work. And I had this identity that I had created for myself, which was entrepreneur, business owner, yoga studio owner, yoga teacher. And then suddenly when that went away, I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing or who I am or, you know, what I want to do. And I had been thinking about podcasting because I'd been listening to a lot of podcasts. Students had suggested that I start a yoga podcast because they liked the way I cued my classes. And they were like, you're one of the only teachers that's so detailed and descriptive that I could imagine doing the yoga flow without actually seeing what you're doing. And I thought that this was an interesting idea, but I also was over the yoga thing at that point. And I was like, what else do I have to share? Or what else could I make a podcast about? And, you know, your purple squirrel reference, being somebody who has been in theater and being somebody who's a classically trained singer and being somebody who's been in media production and who's had a business and who's taught yoga and done all these things. You know, I had a million ideas about what a podcast could be about, but I had to pick something. And I had to start somewhere. And I would say I probably did not know yet what I stood for until I started making the content. And then it came from there. That was a very long way of.
No, that's a great story and very purple squirrely, I must say. That's perfect.
When somebody's like, I think I want to start a podcast, how do you get to that place of this is what I stand for and this is what my big V voice is?
Yeah. And usually, if you really sit down and think about it, your life follows an arc. It has threads that connect everything. Your threads had heavy, heavy doses of creative energy, creativity, needing freedom, I hear, inside of that. Would that be accurate?
I would say yes.
Yes,
You're
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And also needing to produce something that makes some kind of an impact on other people. Not everybody's creative urges have that. Some people create for themselves and other people create for other people so that it has an impact. It's a dance. And so I'm also one of those people that creates to leave a legacy. It's to create an impact. It's to make a difference. It's to be, to use a cliche, that drop that creates a ripple of some kind. And it's less important what the ripple is as long as it makes a difference and is based on our strengths. So when we look at podcasting as an example, podcasting is a really interesting medium because it is so flexible and it can be on anything. And it is a completely open format. Seth Godin has been saying recently a lot that podcasting is the new blogging, and I don't think he's wrong. I think we're going to see a huge expansion in the number of podcasts out there before we see it kind of fall away and become more like blogging is today, where we have prominent bloggers and then another medium or another methodology kind of takes over. I mean, still, most businesses, most experts have a blog of some kind and keep it up one way or another. But for those of us particularly who are verbal rather than written communicators, podcasting's a really natural fit to take the place of a blog. And for those of us who love to connect with other people, doing interviews like this, of course, makes a big difference as well. So we look at all of those things, preferences, personality, interests, strengths, all of that kind of goes into a podcast. And we also take a look at where is there an intersection of what you're good at, what you're going to be able to sustain as a topic over a period of time, unless you want to do a limited series, that's fine too. And honestly, what are people looking for? Because ultimately you do want to have an audience. You can go super niche. I mean, there are some really, really successful, really super ridiculous niche podcasts out there. I mean, I remember one of the guys who was in the Florida Podcasters Association with me, and he is killing it with a podcast because he's the only person in his industry doing a podcast on his industry.
Yeah.
And it's something like government procurement contracts. I mean, there's only maybe a couple thousand people in all of North America who have this job.
Yeah.
But all of them listen to his podcast.
Right.
So he's even gotten a TED Talk out of it and a ton of contracts. So it really just kind of depends on this kind of intersection, a little bit of a Venn diagram of overlap in these different areas where you can dig down and see where you might be best served starting your podcast. And ultimately, podcasting is a long tail game. I think you would probably agree with me. Most podcasts that are out there that are popular overnight are popular overnight because those people already had massive followings. Or it is a very, very hot topic. And that's where we see communities form very, very quickly around television shows.
Yeah.
Things like that. If it's a new show and it's really hot and it kind of blows up and somebody starts a podcast about it, they're going to gain a following probably pretty quickly.
Right. So how did you know what your big V voice was? Did you always know that you wanted to do this kind of work, or how did you get to this point where you feel so confident about speaking about vocal leadership and helping to empower other leaders in that way?
Oh, no, it's been a super twisty journey. It always is. I actually never even wanted to be an entrepreneur when I was growing up because I grew up as an entrepreneur and I always viewed my parents' business as a bratty younger sibling.
Oh, okay.
And the thing is, though, I got out in the world. I trained as a therapist. I was going to work with international populations and teenagers at risk in high schools and college and got into the field and then very quickly realized I am wired as an entrepreneur, and it's a different wiring than the rest of the world is. It's a subset. It's like being wired as an artist, and if you're an artist or you're not. I mean, sometimes it takes us a while to claim that identity, just like it took me a while to claim my identity as an entrepreneur. And I would actually call myself both at this stage of the game. But it took me a long time to claim both of those identities. I resisted it tremendously because I just wanted to be able to get a paycheck and go home at the end of the day and chill. And it doesn't work that way when you've got this pull to create and to advocate for other people and to leave the world a better place than you found it. And I could not stand bureaucracy and being stuck in the politics of large organizations. I may be preaching to the choir here.
For me, for sure. Even when I talk with friends who have jobs, have bosses and coworkers and things like that, that's the perfect remedy. Every time I'm frustrated about my business or frustrated with a client or feeling overwhelmed at the amount of work that I have to do or feeling like I need to work on yet another weekend or something like that, all I have to do is talk to one of my employed friends about their woes. And I'm like, yeah, nope, I would not trade with you. you. I wouldn't do it.
Exactly. Yeah, I think all entrepreneurs, all creators really go through what I call Walmart moments where you're like, oh, I'm just going to go run a register somewhere. I'm just going to go get in a cubicle and relax. And then you actually remember what that's like
Uh-huh.
because we've all done it.
Yeah.
And then it's like a full body visceral experience. Like, yeah, both of us, our shoulders are both going up on the video. I could see they're like, no. Right. And so it is, it's choosing. And that comes out of that big V voice. That comes out of that value set that we have, that we would choose working 80 hours a week for ourselves instead of 40 hours a week for somebody else. That we would choose the creative process. I posted a meme on my Facebook page the other day and it said, creative process. This is awesome. And then it said, this is shit. I am shit. Maybe this is okay. Okay, this is awesome. And it was like this arc of the creative process. I'm like, yeah, every day. It's very, very funny to do that. But in terms of finding my own pathway through it, it has been a tremendous combination of reflection, mentorship, getting my ass kicked, experimenting with new things, failing a ton, all of that. And I actually never expected to circle back around to anything involving vocal production in my career. I grew up with a microphone in my hand. I love theater. I was trained in voice. I was always speaking. I didn't even know what voice acting was. I didn't even know it was an option as a profession, or broadcasting. It didn't occur to me going into communications and broadcasting when I went to college, because I never assumed that I was attractive enough, honestly, to be on a TV camera.
Mm-hmm.
So very self-limiting beliefs around all of that kind of stuff. And it's funny because, I speak on stages all the time. I'm on podcasts all the time in my own show. But it's been this arc of just twisty, weird exploration. One of my core pieces of who I am is curiosity.
Mm.
And a curiosity is what has saved me many, many times. I didn't realize that's what it was until maybe half a dozen years ago. And then I realized it's curiosity that has always gotten me out of a jam, because when you are in a deep funk, you might not be able to think positive. You might not be able to put on a shiny face.
Yeah.
But you can probably activate a little bit of curiosity, even if it's dark curiosity. Like, wonder what would happen if I just lay down and didn't get up again. Even if it's dark curiosity, it gets you out of that apathetic, dark stuckness into a little bit of what if thinking.
Mm-hmm. And
And you can pull yourself out into a place of having a more courage by tugging on a thread of curiosity. If courage is the lion, then curiosity is the cat. It's just a very small lion. You can work up to the big one.
Yeah. You had a podcast that was quite successful from what I can tell, which is the Start Something Show.
Yeah.
And that stopped production a couple of years ago. Is that true?
Yeah, we did 2 seasons.
Okay.
And honestly, my business got so busy working with other people's shows, I didn't have time to do my own. So I had focused on podcast guesting. And we also, just recently started working with folks on becoming expert podcast guests themselves. So those are both veins that we work with people around. But yeah, finally, I have another show in production, and it's taken me a while to even allow myself the time and space creatively to dive into it. And it is very vulnerable for me. I'm not doing a show on how to have your own podcast. I'm not doing a show on audiobook creation or even on vocal leadership. It's really on this intersection of entertainment and enlightenment, of what it is to be human and to laugh at being human, and at the same time have a curiosity and inquiry courageously, because it is vulnerable, into what do we have to deal with as people? How can we pull ourselves forward into loving ourselves more, being more self-accepting, and improving ourselves at the same time in a way that is in alignment with that inner voice.
So why this new podcast, this particular topic, and why now?
Well, in the world of being creative, it's one of those ideas that wouldn't go away.
Yeah.
And it kept coming back to me. And all of my best breakthroughs, all of my most successful ventures have come from these ideas that persisted. I have a track record of being kind of on the front end of certain trends. But until I actually started producing audiobooks and podcasts, I hadn't really doubled down, hadn't had the passion or the interest to double down and really put my stake in the ground as an expert or to devote my company's time to building out around those areas. And then podcasting and audiobooks was the ideas that wouldn't go away. And I finally surrendered to that, and it grew very, very quickly. So this show idea had the same feel.
Mm-hmm.
It had the same persistence. And it's a little risky because it is tongue in cheek. It's a little naughty. But it's one of those things I finally said, you know what? If it blows up in my face, what's the worst that could happen? I spend some time developing it, and then what? Becomes another good story. And then I'll create something else. There's never any lack of things to create, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in this idea of how our voice changes over time. I don't think I've talked about this specifically with anyone yet on this series. And I mean, there's the way our physical voice changes because of anatomy and biology over time.
True.
And because of experience and practice and things like that. But in terms of what we're putting out in the world, because I think that as we have, as you say, there's more and more people podcasting, there's more and more people getting their voice out there, there's more and more people who are embracing the platform. When you do that, it's pretty hard not to let your own personality come through as its own unique brand. It's not like you have this professional life that's completely separate from your personal life. There's a lot of merging. So this new show, which is not exactly what you're selling, it's not exactly your work, but clearly it's become an extension of that. Like whatever has come before has led you to this show, which feels a little bit risky. It feels a little bit different than what you've put out there, or maybe a lot of bit different than what you've put out there. How do you navigate when you feel that there's a shift or a change of direction happening in your voice, in your persona that you're putting out in the world?
Yeah. And quite honestly, it's funny. I'm going through this right now, and I've been through it many times, but that doesn't mean, having been through it many, many times, probably at least a dozen significant times in my life, that it's not painful in some way or arduous in some way. What changes over time is, at least it has for me, is that I recognize it faster, that there's a change coming. It's a little bit like shedding a skin, like a snake shedding its skin. Things become increasingly more uncomfortable, and you're not sure why. My chiropractor was working on me once as I was going through one of these phases of change, and everything was fine. Everything in my life was fine. Really, no crises, but I was so uncomfortable. And she was working on me, and all of a sudden she stood up and she said, "I got it." I said, "What?" She said, "You're molting." I said, "What?" She goes, "You're molting. A friend of mine has this parrot, and it goes through these molting phases. And I was just at her house the other day. That's why I thought of it. And there's this whole care protocol that they have to go through for this molting bird, because there's nothing wrong with the bird, but it's going through this weird, awkward, ugly phase where it's shedding its feathers so it can grow new ones." I was like, oh, for Christ's sake. That actually really resonates.
Yeah.
So that I actually went home and looked up care of a molting bird to kind of see what the protocols were. And it was remarkably similar to self-care protocols that I've had mentors told me for years. This is what you should be doing. Making sure you have adequate rest and water and times of quiet and solitude and not too much stimulation. All these other things. And I'm going through this phase right now. Because I'm an extrovert, I surround myself with other people who I can have conversations with and who can just receive me as I am. And oftentimes what is a high emotional state, right? And they're not triggered by that. They can just be with the fact that I'm having a perfectly rational conversation, but crying at the same time. Or that I switch topics in the middle of a conversation and go from this very kind of like business strategy conversation to suddenly, discussing kind of where I'm feeling that my chakras are off, right? It's just this kind of whole world of different parts of what makes me me, and it feels disconnected. And so in this phase of growth, it feels weird, it feels nebulous, it feels like this molting bird. But ultimately, I have some trust that having been through this a whole bunch of times, that, oh, this is that phase. Okay,
Mhm.
what can I do to take care of myself? Where am I likely to sabotage myself? Honesty, very important. And where can I get support? And then let's move through this, because I don't want to stay in it. I don't want to wallow in it for too long. But sometimes it takes as long as it takes, you know? It's not the Enlightenment Olympics.
Well, I was just thinking about this idea of creative molting is what I'm going to call it,
Oh, I like
because
that.
I don't know if you know this or not, but this year, February, March, I had a pretty significant health diagnosis and had to do a pretty hefty surgery that the doctors all said, oh, you have a 4 to 6 week recovery period. Well, that was in March, and I'm still definitely in recovery
Oh, wow.
physically, mentally, emotionally. And, I've been seeing a psychotherapist for the first time in my life. I've never done that.
Hmm.
I've been going to different types of physical therapists, body workers, energy work, like all this kind of stuff to figure out why I feel so freaking uncomfortable all the
Yeah.
time. And that's a word that doesn't quite describe it, but it's also like difficult to describe exactly how
Hmm.
I've been feeling. And why am I suddenly so emotional for no reason? And why am I suddenly like completely apathetic about things that I used to care about and used to be important to me? And why do I feel like I want to change everything up? And for the longest time, I was thinking this diagnosis could not have come out of nowhere. There has to be a reason. And so I was thinking, what do I need to change in my diet? What do I need to change in my lifestyle? Maybe I need different supplements. Maybe I need to do better self care in order to prevent this health thing from happening again. And the doctors are like, no, no, you didn't do anything to cause this. We don't know why this happens. But now I'm like, what if it's not even that I need to like change my diet and my supplements and all that stuff? What if it's actually like a creative change that needs to happen? What if that's actually the thing that's making me so uncomfortable, is that it has something to do with the health of my creative life? I don't know. That's the
That's
thought that.
really, no, that's really interesting. And I think you may be onto something there. Anytime we have a massive life change, it shakes up our identity.
Mhm.
I remember when I had my son, my first child, and there were some things that were clearly very chemical, and hormones always come into play. But you got to also, is it a chicken or the egg
Right.
situation, right? Is it my mental state causing the hormonal shift? Is it the hormone shift causing the mental shift? It's a combination of both. But what I also found was that the postpartum depression that I experienced was heavily related, A, sleep deprivation, but
Yeah.
B, change in identity.
Yeah.
Who the hell am I now as a mom? Like, you can do it intellectually, but once you had that kid in your arms, or once you had that medical diagnosis, or once you're in or out of a relationship, in the last 2 years, I chose to end a 20-year marriage. Been together since I was 19 years old.
Mm.
Long time.
Yeah.
Identity change. And that is, I think, a lot of times what shakes us to our core, because we end up questioning what we believe we are. And so I think that's part of that molting bird or shedding a skin, or that sense of not being right in yourself,
Yeah.
right? It's off. Something's off. Yeah. So I think it's worth going into the inquiry, and sometimes dietary change, physical change. I think all of that is things we all need to take a look at. That's an extension of this piece of us of who do we stand for? Who am I now? What's enduring? Is there a part of me that I have been denying or neglecting that's getting really loud?
Yeah. And I think that that's where, as you say, knowing what you stand for and then being able to express it. But sometimes in the expressing,
Hmm.
you figure out the back end of it. Do you think
Oh,
that?
yeah. Totally. It's like, yeah, it's very spirally cyclical. It's not a straight line. It's no, it's so twisty. But that's it. Humans are fascinating. We do all this crazy stuff and it never seems to end. You can always count on human beings' creativity to be sublime or horrifying and anywhere in between. We are capable of so much, and it's just a matter of where we end up directing that energy.
Yeah. I work with a lot of people who have their own shows or want to create their own shows as a host. But then there are also people who are like, well, I love podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I think they're awesome. I'm building my own brand. I'm creating my own thought leadership, and I'd love to be a guest on shows. What do I do? How do I put myself out there as a podcast guest? How do I get started? And I have a hard time coaching them on that because I think the way that I've gotten on shows is because I have my own show and
Right.
because I'm a podcaster and because I know a ton of podcasters. And also, I get pitched all the time for guests and I almost never take pitches. So I'm curious for you, for somebody who is working to build that thought leadership, how do they begin?
Yeah, it's a simple answer, but there's multiple steps. So this goes back to coming up, first of all, with the types of things you want to talk about. Who's the audience you want to reach? So you start with audience. And we're assuming that, you already have a message and you already have a company or you have an expertise in some realm. So you want to define your audience first. And then you got to go find the shows that have that audience, which requires some research or requires some help from somebody who does research for you. We have a methodology that we show people. So the way that we work with podcast guesting isn't so much a booking agency. There are some really good booking agencies out there, but we actually teach people the more relationship and influence side of getting yourself on more podcasts as an expert guest. And this approach is much more intimate. It's much warmer. And it also requires a little bit more investment of time. But that being said, part of the value or a lot of the value of being an expert podcast guest is not just getting on the interview and that host sharing their audience with you, but it's in two other areas. One is the relationship with the host. And I would say about 95% of podcast guests don't follow up with their hosts afterwards. Yeah, you're shaking your head. You're like, yeah, totally, right? Huge missed opportunity for relationship and collaboration. And you're on their show because you have common audience. You're just going to leave that there? That's crazy. And then the second part is that podcasting is beautiful content. It's beautiful content. So are you taking that content and repurposing it? Are you using it to boost your search engine optimization? Are you using it in your content marketing? Are you using it in your blog? And so we kind of take this whole process from the beginning to the end of helping people find their audience, find the shows, how to generate a relationship with those hosts, whether it turns into an interview or not. Sometimes tons of other value comes out. I've approached podcast hosts and not ended up on their show, but they've ended up being an affiliate for my course or just referring me clients, or we end up on a summit together. All kinds of things happen out of those relationships. Getting on the shows is one, and then it's preparing to be on that show. What is your message? Let's take a look at your storytelling. Let's do some work with your voice. There are vocal factors that are important. So if somebody's got serious vocal fry or they uptalk all the end of their sentences, which really kills their credibility, and then everyone thinks they're Canadian. So sorry, my Canadian friends. I have a lot of Canadian friends. My boyfriend is Canadian too. So getting all of that together, making sure that you are practicing good guest etiquette. There's a whole body of best practices around etiquette. And being just knowledgeable in that world. And then, of course, afterwards, generating the relationship with the host and repurposing that podcast content into gold, basically. So it's that entire world of being a guest that is possible. And for most of my folks who are subject matter experts, executives, entrepreneurs, authors, they're doing it themselves, or they have a VA or they have teams that are actually handling some of the front end and back end setup. But even just the center nugget of it, which is, how to really make sure you're giving the host what they need and creating the relationship with the host in that center portion there is just so, so important, because I'm sure you've got the same problem that I've had as a podcast guest, which is you get these pitches that don't speak to you at all. They're just like a very salesy or cold. They obviously haven't listened to your show. They obviously don't know anything about your audience. Those are the mistakes we see all the time.
They always start out like this. I loved your episode of The Creative Imposter, which is usually spelled wrong. And because it's a fair mistake because you can spell imposter with an ER at the end, which is more common, or an OR, which is also correct, but less common in how I happen to spell it. So they usually spell it with ER. I loved your episode on, and it's whatever the subject line of my most recent episode is, or the title of my most recent episode. That's almost always what it says.
Yeah, that's pretty lazy.
And I'm like, really? Who's paying you to do this? Because this is not helping anybody.
Mm-hmm. It's very formulaic, and who's going to believe that? It's just not believable.
Yeah.
Right. And if I don't believe your email, I'm sure as hell not going to believe who you are as an expert.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is making a first impression. It is important. It's not unsalvageable. I've actually fallen on my sword a couple of times sending emails out to people that shouldn't have gotten them. I had a team member screw up an entire campaign of sending emails out to a bunch of authors. And I basically wrote a follow-up email going, well, that was awkward. Really, really sorry about that. That was dumb. And that should not have happened. I apologize for wasting your time. Interestingly enough, most successful campaign I did.
Really? Because it was authentic, right?
Well, not only that, but it actually hit the subject line. And please, people, don't do this on purpose. We have a natural tendency to want to know what the screw up is.
Yeah.
As human beings. We want to know us. How did they fall on their face? Yeah. So they opened the second email. They didn't open the first one, where I was like, sorry, because they wanted to see what the mistake was. And that wasn't my intention, but that's ended up being what happened. It was quite funny.
Yeah, I have definitely seen that as a marketing tactic where people are sending something with subject line like, oh, I really screwed up, and you're like, I don't even know what are you talking about? And it's clearly a tactic. Mm-hmm. So yes, do not do that if it's a tactic. No. That was a genuine moment, and that's why it worked.
Exactly.
So Tina, as we're getting to a close here, what advice do you have for somebody who's listening to this going, well, I thought I had something to say and I knew what my message was, but now I'm not sure. I'm second guessing my message. I'm second guessing whether I really know what it is I stand for. I'm second guessing whether I'm really ready to have my own show or I'm really ready to be a podcast guest. What do you say to that person?
Keep going. The only way you'll ever know is if you actually do it, if you actually dive in, if you take the action. The best way to get to know if you're ready is to know that you're probably not ready, because we're never freaking ready, and to just go ahead and do it. And as the saying goes, build the airplane on the way down after you've jumped off the cliff. It's not always going to work. And that's okay, because you don't have to hit the bullseye on the first try. You've got many, many arrows in your quiver, and you can just keep firing away, keep learning, and keeping your heart open, I think, is one of the most challenging and valuable things we can do. And allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, not victimized. Big difference, but vulnerable in our strength, in our resilience, and in our willingness to keep stepping forward into that creative fire, because sometimes it does feel like you're burning. To be able to course correct. One of the most researched topics in entrepreneurship is what makes people successful. And one of the characteristics that comes out in most of the research is the ability to make shifts quickly. And you can't make shifts quickly if you spend a lot of time wallowing in self-pity or in victimhood. You can be very passionate and very emotional, and at the same time, you still have to keep stepping forward. And that's why it's important to be able to have a rational conversation and cry at the same time. Check in with your inner voice and see if it's matching your outer voice. And that's always a good place to look, and keep going, keep creating.
Keep your heart open, be vulnerable, not victimized, make shifts quickly, and keep creating. I couldn't have come up with better advice for a time like this. Sincere gratitude to Tina Dietz for what became an Oracle share with us way back in 2019. And that new podcast she was talking about, it launched. You can listen to it right now. It's called The Morning Wood. And no, it's not about what you're thinking. It's wood, spelled W-O-U-L-D. And it's a short 8-episode series, so you can go listen to the whole thing this weekend. Meanwhile, remember to reserve your space for the PodFest Global Summit. Whether you're in full-blown podcasting mode or dipping your pinky toe in, or you just want to hang out with me and explore your voice a bit on Friday the 14th, you can get a free pass or upgrade to VIP at thecreativeimposter.com/podfest, linked in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/111, along with links to connect with Tina, Twin Flame Studios, and The Morning Wood Show. This episode was mixed by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine, and our theme music is, as always, I'm probably never going to change this theme music. I love it so much, by Jovia Armstrong. I thank you so much for listening, and this week I'm daring you to align your voice with your big V voice and just see what magic may arise.